Hey, good morning, World Wide Web. My
Good
name's
morning.
Joshua. Sorry, I didn't even let you say good morning. My name's Joshua. I'm the director of tech here at Stone Creek. And to my left,
I'm the director of coffee at Stone Creek, and my name is Jessica.
awesome. Today we're going to be kind of going through some grind size issues, calibrating your grinder, figuring out how if you're not getting the brew flavor, not getting a coffee that you're really liking, it could be probable because of the grind size. So we're going to kind of talk about what grind size does and how it affects your coffee.
Yeah, sometimes we brew coffee at home and we're just not sure why it's tasting the way it is. Maybe it's bitter, maybe it's sour. We're going to help walk you through all of those intricacies today and also talk about a few different kinds of grinders.
Yeah. So what's the coffee that we're using today?
So the coffee that we're going to be using today is our Green Bike Espresso. The really awesome thing about this particular coffee is that you don't just have to brew it as espresso. You can brew it as a pour over. You can brew it as a V60, an AeroPress. I really love this particular composition of coffee. It is a single origin composition. So it's a blend of a medium roasted Colombian coffee with a light roasted Colombian coffee.
Nice.
And it's from the Huila department in Colombia that we source through Caravella Coffee. It's one of our long-term partnerships, and I really like this coffee all year round.
Yeah, super delicious. If you go to any of our cafes across the Milwaukee area, this is what they're going to be brewing for the espresso. So if you want to try it just as espresso, or if you want to try it as anything else, just let them know, and we can get that going for you.
Yep, exactly. And you can apply these same kind of grind principles to dialing in on espresso as well. But today we're going to be focusing on these pour-over methods just because that's what most of us are going to be doing at home. At least if you're me.
Yeah.
This is what I'm doing at home
Right.
with my husband.
Yeah, exactly. So let's get into like the grind size itself. So I know that we have this super cool little
Yeah.
quad box thing of grind size.
So right here we have the whole beans. Next to it we have a coarse setting. So as you can see, it's kind of almost like gravel. Then here we have the medium ground coffee. It starts to get more fine. And finally, the fine coffee is almost like a powdery substance. It kind of looks like kinetic sand, which is fun.
So fun. So we are going to be using our V60s today, but we're going to kind of talk about how a V60 looks when you have it too fine, too coarse, and then what you can do to kind of remedy that to make the perfect cup.
Yep, exactly. So I think that we can kind of talk through these things as we brew.
Yeah,
so I would like
definitely.
to start out with the fine one just because I think that it's probably the most dramatic one that we'll do.
For sure.
Especially in terms of total time.
Definitely.
So
I'll
we'll
get the hot water for you.
start by making sure that we rinse our filter. The reason why we really want to make sure that we rinse our paper filters is because some paper filters just kind of have a papery flavor. This flavor can get imparted on your coffee if you don't rinse it. So this is a really, really simple step to really up your game and make your brew taste better at home.
Another reason why we want to rinse our filter, aside from the paper taste, is that filter retains a lot of water. And so you want to make sure that that filter is fully saturated with that water before you start your brew, so you're not taking any of that really measured and dialed in water away from your coffee, and it would kind of soak into that filter. So we're getting that out of the way first, so it can just be water to coffee contact the whole way through.
Exactly. And I'm actually using 200 grams of water to rinse this. So I'm actually using quite a bit amount. And I'm just going to make sure that I dump that out because I don't want that to be in my final brew because that would totally defeat the purpose of rinsing it, right?
I've definitely been there before. Super watery down coffee, didn't know what was wrong and realized I didn't dump the water.
Yep, sometimes it happens. So now I'm going to put the coffee inside of my rinsed out filter. We've already ground this very fine. So as you can see, it looks pretty fine in there. I'm going to flatten this out. You can tell it's really fine too because of all of these chunks. When there's clumps like this, it's usually something that you see only on finer grinds.
Yeah, because the static between them gets so intense that they just kind of group up, and like you could poke them and they'd break up, but that's kind of how you know it's a little too fine.
Exactly. So now I'm going to bloom the coffee and I'm going to add 70 grams of water. Oh, really careful. The thing about those clumps too is that they kind of start to float and separate from the other things. So if you do have clumps in your brew, you're going to want to make sure that you bust those up either by pouring on top of them or using the spoon that we're going to use to break this surface in a little bit.
Cool.
One of the One of the cool things about this brew recipe is excavating. It sounds kind of lame, but it's going to feel really cool when you excavate your grounds at the end of the bloom. So now I'm going to excavate my grounds. I don't like to get too much in there and dig too much. That's not really the point of it. The idea is just so that you break the surface so that there's not a hard puck of coffee at the bottom.
It can be kind of interesting if you do accidentally get a little too far down because of how open the bottom of the V60 is. You can accidentally poke through that filter, which is why we don't want to really get down in there with the spoon. We just want to break the surface, like Jessica said. So now we're just waiting. One of the things that you'll notice as you're brewing a cup of coffee with a V60, Chemex, anything like that, and the grind is too fine, is it's not going to drain super fast. And the reason for that being is because those fine particles are so packed together, it's not allowing that water to pass through as fast as we would want it.
Exactly. Once you've added all of your water to this brew recipe, you're going to want to stir.
Get a little motion of the ocean in there. Start spinning around. One of the ways as well, if you do have a burr grinder, blade grinder, either way at home, one of the ways you can check for inconsistency in your grind as well is if you see a lot of it kind of stacking up on the sides of the filter.
Yeah.
If it's not kind of staying down on that level bed, then you know that things are a little bit bigger clumps, smaller clumps of coffee, and they kind of sit on the edge of that filter.
Yeah, the grounds bed shouldn't be concave or convex. At the end of the brew, it really ideally should be pretty flat. It's not always going to be flat, and that's okay. But ideally, it's not going to have a big like hill in the center or be off like mountains
kind of like
on the side.
Yeah, mountain range.
As you can see, this is taking quite a while, especially as we get towards the end of the brew. It's just kind of taking a long time to drag.
Which, when it's taken too long, when there's too much water on those coffee grounds for too long, what happens to the coffee?
The coffee really starts to over-extract when
Okay.
this happens.
Yeah.
It starts to over-extract too many of the solids and aromatic compounds, and that's when it starts to taste kind of bitter.
Yeah, it kind of sits on your tongue kind of heavy.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes this also tastes almost metallic. So if you're tasting something that's metallic in your brew, it might be because you're actually grinding a little bit too fine. And I think that what's so cool about grind size is that it's a really easy way to elevate your brew. So by changing your grind size, by dialing it into what grinder you have, since both of these grinders are different and what you have at home might be different, you can really make things taste better.
All right, I'm just preheating these mugs, even though we're probably expecting it to be a little over-extracted, still want to make the best of the experience.
Yeah, exactly. And then we can kind of talk through what we're tasting in this cup with you so that you have an idea of what you might be tasting at home and why it tastes that way. As you can see, it took a really long time to draw through. And you can see all of the fines on the outside of this. They all just started to settle.
It gets super muddy looking. That's how you'll know. I mean, we are looking for finer grinds like this for AeroPress or for espresso, but when it comes to V60 and you see that really heavy muddiness,
Yep.
that means that it was way too fine. We're going to get that over-extraction that we don't want. But
Yeah, exactly. And if I see this at home, I know right away what I'm going to be tasting.
yeah.
So having
Yep.
this kind of information in hand is really essential to making sure that you're enjoying the coffees you're tasting to their fullest potential. Just because you can have a really delicious coffee and it's not necessarily going to taste really delicious if it wasn't properly brewed.
Yeah, exactly.
So now we can taste
trash
this
that.
brew.
Oh, we'll just leave it there. Perfect.
Yep. It almost looks like art.
Like we meant it to be. All right.
Okay, so
A lot of times you can kind of smell it too before you get into that over extraction.
yeah, and I mean, I think that you can kind of see it. There's almost like this tackiness on my palate. So I'm putting my tongue against the roof of my mouth because it's almost like a stickiness that lingers from coffees that are brewed this way. And that's one of the telltale signs for me. It's not just these visual cues, it's also the sensory cues that you're going to get when you're tasting things that aren't brewed properly. So it almost brings out a kind of like astringency too.
Yes. Super, yeah, envelope, as Drew said. Envelope is very, very consistent with what I'm tasting. That like when you lick the little, I don't know, the tacky strip. It's like an adhesive.
Yeah, the
that
adhesive
like
on the envelope.
kind of sits on your tongue, almost that like kind of heavy bitterness. Yeah, that is not pleasant, but
Especially for medium and dark roasts too. It's really going to bring out some of the darker attributes of the roast profile if you're not brewing it properly. So some of the richness is going to really shine through, and you may or may not want that. And we're going to talk about that as we move through this too today, that you can adjust your brew for what you want out of it. And that's something that's really cool to me and really exciting, that we can all create these recipes that resonate with us and our own preferences. And you can use science to get there, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
What?
Absolutely. That's so sweet. All right, cool. I'm going to get this guy prepped up for the overly coarse grind so we can see the differences between that. While we're doing that, Jessica, what are these two grinders that we have in front of us?
So the two grinders that we have are a Baratza Encore, and then we also have a Fellow Ode right here.
Ode.
I really like both of these grinders because they're both really different from one another. And both of them you can kind of imagine being on your kitchen countertop, which I think is one of the things that's so great. So depending on what you're looking for, both of them have something different to offer. So for this particular grinder here, I just want to show you some of the settings. If you do decide to purchase these grinders, or if you already have one at home, I can teach you a little bit more. So the 0 on the Encore is going to be your finest setting. And then as you move to the higher numbers, that's going to get coarser. Both of these grinders are burr grinders. So something that we should definitely talk about is the difference between burr grinders and blade grinders. Both grinders are different use grinders, in my opinion. So I really like blade grinders for camping. They're really easy to put in a backpack, take wherever you want to go. I have a hand crank blade grinder that's really awesome. It fits in my little backpack.
Low maintenance.
Exactly.
Yep.
They're also really easy to clean. However, if you really want to step things up and get maximum consistency, it's really nice to be able to use a burr grinder. And burr grinders are, of course, what we use in our cafes. And burrs are really cool because they pulverize the coffee instead of cutting them up into little pieces like the blades.
Yeah.
So in pulverizing it, it makes more uniform of a grind particle size. And we really need that uniformity if we want to use the grind particle size as a means to making the cup taste better.
Yes, definitely. So the blade grinders are awesome, and the only thing that is difficult to like adjust with a blade grinder is that consistency. And so there are some like kind of like life hacks, I guess you could call, to getting that blade grinder consistency a little closer to what you would get with a burr grinder or something like that. And one of the ways that I do it is I'll use that the blade grinder, I'm sorry. Use the blade grinder and then throw it over kind of like a mesh strainer and just tap it once or twice. Some of those fines are good. You want some of those fines.
Yeah, definitely.
Even if you have a burr grinder at home, you're going to have some fines. It's never going to be just uniform all the way across. So you want some of those to kind of give that variability of flavor. But giving it 1 or 2 taps over the trash will get some of those really powdery fines out of there, and then throw it in your V60 or however you're brewing, and that should get you a little closer to that uniformity that we're looking for.
Exactly. So really, you can use the tools that you have available to you. You don't need one particular grinder. We're just giving you different suggestions about what you might want to use given where you are and what you're brewing.
For sure. All right, coarse coffee going in. Still using the same green bike, so we're still looking for those flavor notes and qualities that we were looking for in the original, but this one's going to be a little bit under extracted. Just going to level out that bed. Got our 24 grams, tear it out, give it a 70-gram bloom here, just like Jessica did. Ooh. See, even already, if you were watching before, look at how fast this water is coming out. It's not even giving that bed of grounds time to really soak anything in. So this initial coffee on the bottom is so light. And so, oh, thank you. So we're seeing that water drop through really quickly, and that's kind of how you can see initially, if your grind's already too coarse, it's just gonna just drop through there like there's nothing. As if there's like 3 rocks in there, it just kind of went all around them and just dropped down to the bottom.
Yeah, and sand and gravel is an analogy that we really like to use in our education classes. So when you have a really coarse coffee, when you pour water over it, it's going to be like pouring water over gravel. Because of the surface area, it's just going to run off of the sides of the ground up beans. But when it's really fine, it's like pouring water over sand.
Yep.
Since there's so much sand in one space, even though it has a smaller surface area, the water doesn't as easily pass through. So if you're ever having a problem with your grind particle size and you kind of can't figure out if it needs to be finer or coarser, I like to visit that analogy just because it's very straightforward.
Mm-hmm. And if that's still something that you can't figure out, we have this awesome, cool chat feature on our website where you can chat with coffee geeks and be like, hey, my grind size is crazy out of whack and I don't know what to do about it. Contact us. We're more than happy to help and talk to you about it.
Exactly. So wow, look at that already. Woo! You can tell too that it's created a totally different kinds of grounds bed. So as you can tell, it's almost like a thick film of coarse grounds around the outside of this.
Kind of just adhering to the walls rather than creating that flat bed, which is what we're looking for.
I mean, what does that mean for the brew then too if that happens? That means that it's not going to have the right contact. It has very uneven contact with the grounds bed, and because of that uneven distribution and contact, it's actually extracting these particles at different times.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. So we're going to have variable levels of how much was extracted, what flavor profiles were extracted from that, all of the above. Ooh, dripping all over the place.
And I think too that you mentioned the chat feature, and I think that that's really important to talk about. Oh, it's very hot. The chat feature is really nice because sometimes you're not going to get the kind of information you need just by looking at a product manual or looking on the internet. So it's really nice to be able to have that human connection to a group of coffee professionals who are more than happy to help you. And the cool thing too about us is that if we don't have information, we're always going to have that pursuit of never stop learning. And we're going to help find it for you. So again, please feel free to reach out to us via that chat feature on our website, and we'll be more than happy to help you.
Yeah, we encourage the like out of the box questions because sometimes we just don't think of things and things haven't come up before, so we want to learn about those things. So just bring it on. Let's go. We want to learn together.
Yeah. So what are you tasting in this?
Honestly, not a lot.
That's exactly what I'm experiencing.
Exactly.
So you almost have to second guess yourself when you have this type of coffee. You think like there's a hint of coffee. It's like coffee essence, but it's more like coffee water than it is like coffee. Yeah. And the really big bummer about that is that we used the same amount of coffee, but it came to a totally different end because of the means that we used to get to it. So in a way, it's almost wasteful if we don't want it to taste like this to brew it this way. Yeah. And I know that I've brewed coffees before, and I'm not sure if I want to drink them after. So for me, it's really essential that I get my brew right every time.
Definitely. To me, it kind of tastes like I'm drinking a cup of hot water and someone in another room just yells coffee. And like this, that.
Yeah. I will say, though, that sometimes I do enjoy coffees that are a little bit more watery. But for me, grind size isn't the way to get there. It would be by adjusting the ratio, which we'll definitely talk about on a future Instagram Live, I'm sure.
And water quality definitely contributes to how your final brew comes out.
So there are other ways to play with how your coffee tastes. This is one variable that we find really essential. And why we decided to focus on it today.
So
now
that we know what doesn't work, let's figure out making the perfect cup. Let's figure this out.
Yeah, definitely. So before we ground it too fine, and then we ground it too coarse. So we probably need to go somewhere in the middle of those two grinds, and we'll get somewhere that's just right.
Yeah. So we're using a EK43 grinder. I ground the fine at a 9, and then I ground the coarse at an 18. So I'm just going to pull it down to around like 14-ish, which is kind of what we recommend for our cafes.
And that's actually perfect because these grinds are also on an EK. This is a 20 on an EK, super coarse. And this is a 10 on an EK, which is more medium. Whereas this is a 1, which is so fine. Again, look at that. It really is like kinetic sand. It's almost fun to play with. But if you put that one inside of one of these V60s right now, it would brew so much slower than that 9 did that we did earlier. It would be really difficult for the water to pass through. And sometimes the coffee can be so fine, especially in paper filters, that it just won't brew through the filter anymore. It gets stopped up, and those fines kind of become like a block in the bottom of your brewer.
Yep. Keeps it from filtering all the way through, get that nasty over-extracted flavor that we don't want.
You can also adjust your grind particle size for what you are brewing.
Yes.
So I like playing around with changing the grind particle size when I'm brewing different origins, different processing methods. If you're brewing a V60 and it's a 14 grind size or medium fine grind size and it's just not right, you can definitely adjust that and see how it changes if you make it coarser or finer. When coffees are really dense, so for example, coffees from Ethiopia, sometimes they need to be ground a little bit more coarsely.
Okay.
Conversely, sometimes coffees need to be ground a little bit more finely when they're less dense. But again, even within those ranges, every coffee is different. This is an agricultural product, and the coffees that we purchase are from farms that grow their coffees in transparent methods, and we really want to make sure that they shine.
Awesome. You want to do the honors of brewing the perfect cup?
Yeah, I can't wait. After tasting those other brews, I'm really looking forward to being able to taste this one. You can also see that the coffee is off-gassing a little bit differently than it did with those other brews. So for the coarse ground, it's almost like it inhibits the gas from leaving the grounds bed, whereas the fine one also did, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
So this one, actually, you can observe the most bubbles out of any of them. And that's one of the reasons why we do the bloom in the first place, is to help with that off-gassing that happens with beans. Since we roast to order at Stone Creek, it's really important that you off-gas your beans because they're fresh when you're brewing them.
And that gas, if it is trapped within our brew and inside the final product, we do get that bitterness. And there's always like that little bit of astringency if you don't, at least from my experience, when I have forgotten to bloom something, I do find a little bit of that like kind of latent astringency at the end of my sipping, I guess you could say.
Yeah, exactly.
So now we're just waiting, watching it go through. Looks a lot slower than the coarse to me.
Yeah. And with the coarse too, I mean, like on my palate, I can still taste that sourness lingering.
Still just kind of hanging around. Absolutely. Absolutely.
This looks like it's brewing just right.
So now we wait. This is one of the nice times about when you're brewing coffee, whether it be in the morning, at night, when you're focusing on yourself and on your own personal cup of coffee. There's time to just be there and be present with yourself, focus on something that's going to be really good for you. So sometimes it might be a little awkward to sit in the silence, but it's nice. It's definitely nice to just watch like this craft that you're working on come to life.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about before recording today how it's really nice when you go camping to be able to kind of spend this meditative time brewing your coffee, that you boiled the water over the fire or the stove. And again, that's one of the nice times for those blade grinders.
Yes.
And at home, it's also nice to have a really nice burr grinder sometimes too. So it's cool to have different options.
Yeah. Awesome. Sweet.
Our vessel is getting really full of these things that we've dumped out.
All right.
And you can always go on our website and find the recipe that I used to brew this, and then you can watch this video again and brew the proper recipe with us.
Yep. And then once you get this one down, there are so many other recipes out there to try out.
They really are.
Lots of different coffee shops have their way, so go ahead and try checking different things out.
And the cool thing too is that you can make it your way. It doesn't have to be anyone else's way. This is simply a guide for you to kind of taste things how we're tasting them. Now this is
Much
really
more
good.
well-rounded.
Yeah, this is great. And this is what I expect green bike to taste like. I get really nice notes of like cherry and cocoa and black tea. It has a really nice viscous body.
It has like that tangy, like really nice citrus overtone to it.
Yeah.
It's not like crazy, but it's kind of, it rounds it out.
And you can especially really appreciate a great cup of coffee after you've tasted others that aren't so great. The other ones before were definitely drinkable.
Yeah.
But this is something special. And that's where you take that kind of like meditative experience of brewing to the next level, because you're making it not only be relaxing, but it's also really relaxing when you sit back and taste something that's truly great.
Yeah.
And aromatic compounds themselves are a really great way to relax.
Yes, definitely. And one thing to remember while watching through this, if you're going to be brewing with us, anything like that, is there's no one right way to do it. There's a lot of recommended ways, and that's the exciting part about coffee, is that we can continue to learn these new ways. One way of brewing a V60 in 2015 can be completely different from 2021, and that's the exciting part about it, is there's always something new to learn.
Yeah, exactly. I know that we've changed our recipe in the time that I've worked at Stone Creek for almost 7 years, more than once. And all of those changes are exciting ones, because you can kind of see a paradigm shift even in how we brew and taste our coffee at home.
Yeah.
So it's not just good coffee for the coffee shop anymore. It's also good coffee for home. And cleaning your grinder properly is going to be one of the ways that you can get even better coffee. So the product that I have here is made by Ernex Brands. We use this in our cafes, and I use it in our lab. It's called Grinds. This product you put inside of your grinder, and it helps expel all of the grounds and also the oils that get stuck inside of the burrs. So you just put a capful through the grinder. You can kind of look at it. Look at those pellets.
Totally food safe too. It's just like a cornmeal concoction.
And then you follow that up with a rinse of coffee beans to make sure you get all of this out, and your coffee grinder is good to go, all clean. But if you don't have this, there's something that you can actually use at home.
What?
It's minute rice.
Wow.
So if you have minute rice, which I unfortunately didn't have any at home.
I forgot to bring mine
Otherwise,
today.
I would have brought it. You can use minute rice to clean your grinder. It's really important to note here, though, that you can't use any other type of rice. Please don't put other types of rice through your grinder. Only put minute rice through your grinder. The reason for that is because the dehydrated minute rice is really easy for those burrs to break up. But regular rice, like jasmine rice or something like that, is so dense that it might actually hurt your grinder. So please just put minute rice through if you have that, but no other kind. But it's a really easy, cheap way to clean your grinder.
Nice.
I mean, this is going to be
$16 to
$18 a bottle, whereas that minute rice is going to be $1. You can find it at the dollar store.
Yep.
So make sure that you clean your grinder, and I would suggest cleaning your grinder at home at least every 2 weeks. But I like to clean my grinder at least once a week for best practice, if not more.
Or in between different bags of coffee too, because those flavors are gonna stick around.
Especially if you're brewing one of our natural or honey processed coffees, which we have a few coming up in a few months that are going to be so good. But if you're grinding those coffees and putting them through your grinder, and then you're following it with a washed processed coffee, it might impart some flavors that you're not necessarily looking for. So in between those batches, you really want to clean your grinder. That's a really good point to make.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's it. That's all we got for y'all today. If you are interested in either of these grinders, go ahead and check them out on our website, stonecreekcoffee.com. And if you have any more questions, or even more like deep, interesting, or any other questions that we may not have covered, thought-provoking, there we go, brain fart, hit us up on either our social medias, Instagram at Stone Creek Coffee, our website, chat feature, anything like that. We're here to help, because we want to never stop learning together.
Exactly, and enjoy some Stone Creek coffee with us.
Cheers.